All right. So this is Saturday morning in Thailand, Friday evening in the States, and this is the Sangha call. We've got five or six guys on. Nick is on, and Emin, and DJ, and Dhammadas, and Michael is here. And I welcome you all and everybody else who wants to join. And uh, the first thing that we were already talking about is the issue of first causes and deeply buried kinds of things. And uh, Eamon just asked the question is that if we can figure out what caused things originally, then we can avoid having that cause again. Is that kind of the question that you were asking? All right. Well, the answer would then be is that if we're developing the skill of handling right now, then when things come up and get started right now, we can see that and make a change. That we don't, there's no way to go back and fix the original cause. Um, a silly example of that, maybe you've heard this, that in some Zen uh, dojos, monasteries in Japan, when they get new chinaware or get new uh, plateware, they have a ceremony where they chip. They chip the cups, they chip the plates, and all of that, so that it's already messed up in a way. And we then don't have to, let us say, pay attention to make sure that plates don't get chipped. That we like the idea that plates don't get chipped, and the fact is that plates are already imperfect. Things are already imperfect, and so rather than trying to Uh, and also, there's a difference, amen, in the kind of things that we're talking about here as to the original first cause, let us say, of psychological issues, and trying to find out how things got started is really not the issue. The real point is that things keep happening over and over again. They keep starting anew. New things keep happening, and that if we can see things the way that they're happening and starting up right now, then we can handle it right now. But if we get concerned with, well, how did all of this stuff get started in the first place? Then we're dealing with the past. We're not dealing with the present moment. And so the example that I used before we started the call is imagine you're in some sort of vehicle, um, anywhere from roller skates to snowshoes to motorbike, tractor trailer, maybe even a ship. But we're careening downhill at a rapid rate. And how we got started is irrelevant to the real question is in this moment, can I steer this vehicle? Can I watch where it's going? Can I make corrections and keep things safe and secure? That's the way that we want to look at it. And the original cause is irrelevant. And so you're saying that, well, the original cause will then come up again. Well, if it does come again, can you see it as that new thing gets started? There's no reason to deal with old issues, but rather to deal with issues that come up right here in the present moment. That's the way of looking at it. And if we can handle yet again that old issue triggering and coming up. An example was as we were talking about a friend who had a wife who has anger issues. Now, the original cause of why she gets angry can actually be traced back to the fact that she resents the fact that her dad left her when she was a young child. But that's not going to help when she gets angry right here, right now. So she has to deal with the anger that she's got right here, right now. And if she justifies, oh, it's okay for me to be angry because my daddy left me when I was 2 years old, then we actually use the past to justify current bad behavior rather than saying, oh, it doesn't matter how that anger got started or where the original root is. The question is can I handle the anger when it comes up right here, right now? Go ahead.
With things like anger, sometimes it helps to call it, to see it, that it's anger, to be able to, you need to know it's anger before you can say it's okay that there is anger and I can handle it. And sometimes I think it's helpful for people to get to that anger however possible. Now, it might be that it's because their dad left, or it might be something else. The story doesn't really matter. What I feel it matters that whatever that story is, that puts them in contact with the anger, to kind of hold it and then get used to it. It's okay, etc. What do you think about that? I'm curious.
Well, you're right when you say it really doesn't matter the original cause. The fact is now there is a habit that's going on. One of the analogies that I used is imagine that you've got a truck that's stuck in the mud. It doesn't matter how deep that rut can be because it can only be just so deep. By the time that the axle and the bed of the truck is laying on the ground because the wheel is stuck deep in the mud, we can't say, oh, the problem is original ruts are now buried 18 feet deep. No, because the rut that we're in is only 4 feet deep. And so let's deal with the rut that we've gotten ourselves into right now. And if we can see, let us say, as we're driving and about to go into a rut, we can say, wait a minute, rut ahead, let's avoid it. So let's start watching where we're going. Let's look at the immediate present and the immediate future rather than dealing with old problems of how the original rut got started. That's the whole point that makes the teaching of the Buddha so profoundly different than Western psychology and Western senses of thinking that we can investigate the original cause. That in fact Christianity has the idea of an original sin, and that original sin is so profound and so deep that there is no possibility of us getting out of it. And so we have to have a tow truck to come get us out. That tow truck, by the way, is Jesus. You need the Jesus tow truck to get us out because we're stuck in such a deep rut. And the point is that, oh no, there's a lot of different techniques to get out of a rut. We don't have to call Jesus on every little rut. That in fact, the better thing to do is to avoid getting stuck in a rut or find a way of getting out of the rut. Because oftentimes when you call a tow truck, it may be hours or days before the tow truck arrives. And there's a whole lot of things that we can do to get unstuck without having to wait for a tow truck. And from what I hear, tow trucks are often quite expensive. So this whole point then is, let us say, stuck in a rut means that now the truck that's stuck in a rut is a victim to that rut. We're victimized by the ruts that we get ourselves into. And that is actually the mentality of the victim, that we all start off as a victim, that in fact that's an interesting way of looking at what is original sin, is that every baby is born as a victim. that little babies can't take care of themselves. And when we're children, we're ordered around, we're carried around, we're pushed around, we're dressed. We don't dress the way that we want to. We're dressed because of the way that whatever clothes that were given or put on us. Then we have to go to school. We have to study what we don't want to study. I mean, very few kids actually like going to primary school. And then they get in the habit in the middle school. They don't like it. And when they get to high school, they really don't like it. That we do things because we're supposed to do it. So we kind of get stuck in ruts that way, rather than recognizing that we've got a choice, because in fact, going to school is not the rut. That's just the road. Not liking going to school and continuing to not like going to school, that's the rut that we get into. And when we get, because we're young, we're not able to get out of that, then we continue to live our lives like that we're stuck in a rut, as opposed to being able to steer our lives so that we don't keep putting ourselves back into ruts. And so you're talking about it, Eamon, in the sense that we're stuck in a rut, the original rut, the rut that got started when I was 2 years old. I'm still in that rut. And the answer to that is no, this is a new rut. And you're just in the habit of getting stuck in ruts over and over and over again. It's not the same rut. And that we need to get ourselves out of these ruts and then be mindful enough to watch where we're going so that we don't get stuck into them. And this brings in the next point, or the issue of, well, what about rules? What about precepts? What about laws? What about not just being told what to do, but to formalizing and setting these rules about how you're supposed to be in big laws? Like commandments, big 10 commandments. And that within Buddhism, we have what is called precepts. Now, that's an interesting word, the precept, because it's actually not a law or a rule, though most of the precepts that we have in Buddhism correspond very closely to things like the Sharia law or 10 Commandments, or let us say the English common law that developed over centuries. And basically, what these rules are is to protect other people from our bad behavior, that because we feel bad, we're intentionally wanting other people to feel bad. And so these precepts are given in childhood because the child is not wise enough to see how they hurt other people. And this is where we can actually use the precepts as adult Buddhists, is to say, oh, these precepts are there as kind of guidelines for way out into the future, to show us that if you treat other people well, they'll treat you back well. And if you treat other people poorly, then they'll treat you back poorly. Now, that's just another statement of the law of karma. And yet you can treat people poorly, and then they treat you very well. So the law of karma seems to not be working with Donald Trump, because he treats people really, really poorly, and then they suck up to him, mainly because they're afraid of something. So dictators actually get away with things for a while, but then eventually things go south. But the idea then of the precepts is that these are not hard and fast rules. They're actually formulated wisdom from the old times. And so if we can see it from that perspective, then we can now take on the mantle of gaining our own wisdom, so that we do not have to rely upon hard and fast old rules that sprung from old wisdom, that we can use the new wisdom that we have developed currently. So, Amen, do you understand what we're talking about here in the sense of the old stuff? Not only is all the old problems, but we also have the precepts, which are also old. That when we are children, we learn old rules, and then we wind up following those rules when, in fact, sometimes those rules are just not important. Or worse still, they're downright harmful. They fit in one context. Um, let us say it this way: that you're supposed to dress the way that people dress around you. And here in southern Thailand, there's a particular dress code. If I go to Alaska conforming to the dress code that we have in Thailand, there's going to be problems. Do you see that? Okay, so that's the whole point is that times change, but our oftentimes the rules that we have don't work. And so the people of Thailand then dress a certain way that they do because of their old inherited wisdom, and that continues to work. But in Alaska, it doesn't work. That actually what we need to do is to adapt to the circumstances in the moment. So people will say, oh, well, all I have to do is follow the precepts of Buddhism and I'm good to go. There's nothing left. And that leads to an issue or a point that can be stated this way, that the reason that we have these precepts or these rules is so that we don't harm or injure other people and vice versa. So let's look at the vice versa, that we want those people to keep the precepts in order for me to not have to deal with it. So we have the concept then of no anger, because if she gets angry, I feel bad. Therefore, the new rule is that she should not get angry, because I'm trying to protect a core that is sensitive, that it's fragile. It's can be victimized by someone else's anger. However, if we are able to clean out our core and clean out that victimhood out of it, then it's okay for her to get angry. Let her do what she wants to do, because she doesn't affect me. She can threaten to kill the dog, but she's not going to kill the dog. She's just threatening. She's just trying to get to me. How can she get to me if there is no me to be gotten to? This is really the teaching of the Buddha is that when we have our core emptied out so that it's not vulnerable, then we recognize from that that other people are the ones who have sensitive cores and will naturally keep the precepts in order to prevent them from being in a state of suffering, because then they'll try to give that suffering back. And the easy way to handle it then is to not go around harming people. That's in fact, remember the story that I was just telling about? Doesn't matter how this vehicle got careening down the hill. The point is can I steer it right here, right now? Can I steer the conversation so that I don't get angry? That it always has to do with right here, right now. Go ahead. Go ahead.
So you said if we can empty our mind, then there's no one to be sad about the anger. So then what comes up is what if we cannot empty the mind and then there is someone who gets hurt? So isn't that response to the anger, which is anger itself, also part of what is happening? And that is okay too.
All right. Well, the answer would that be, because you're saying, well, what if I can't empty that stuff out? The answer is, never mind, start again. Recognize that the problem is not her being angry. The problem is I don't like it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I can say to myself, well, I can handle that anger. I'll be okay. There's no problem here. And so I can empty out that core right here in the present moment. As opposed to, oh, I've got to go away and clean out my core. Excuse me, you stay angry for a few weeks or months and I'll go deal with my core. And when I get finished with it, we'll come back and finish the angry conversation. No, doesn't take that long. We can just clean that out right here, right now. That her anger is not my problem. My problem is I don't like her anger right now. And so this is the way that we can handle it, is by taking care of business right in this present moment. That we don't have to deal with the... Go ahead, Michael. I can see you got something on your mind.
One thing about dealing with it in the here and now is that we can't actually deal with or experience the past anyways. The past is already dead and long gone. So trying to even like overanalyze the past or fix it is just ultimately going to be fruitless. And why it's so much more worthwhile to just develop the skill of handling dukkha right now as it arises.
Dhammadas, what do you think?
Yeah, I definitely think the past is dead. And like he was just saying, if our awareness is on gladdening the mind in the present moment, then if we are worried about such an illusory past or future, then that would take care of it anyway, because we're just doing everything we can right in the moment, so we wouldn't have to worry about it at some other period of time, because our lifestyle becomes handling everything accordingly to the moment. So if we can develop a practice and become better at transforming dukkha into sukha in the moment, there's really nothing to worry about in some fictitious past or future land.
Yeah, even when we try to experience the past, we're just telling ourselves a story. And it's a story that we make up.
Mm-hmm. That in fact, it's quite easily proven, and they do it over and over again with many different psychological evaluations and testing and whatnot like that, that imagination is exactly the same thing as memories. The mental process of imagination and memories are the same. And for that reason, it's hard to know that something actually happened because we're imagining it now. We think that it actually happened in the past, where in fact it's nothing but an imagination in the present moment. One of the best examples that I know of historically of that was when Janet Reno was the head lawyer, what do they call it in the cabinet level of U.S. government, Attorney General. When she was Attorney General, there came out the fact that she had been the head district attorney of Miami back in the 1980s, and that she was really hard on uh, uh, pedophilia and the rape of little girls. And so, because she was hard on that herself, the police were involved with that, social workers were involved with that, and what really happened is that a woman was trying to figure things out for herself because her uncle had been in prison for years because she, as a young child, had accused him of rape. And basically what was going on is that the social workers and the police so much wanted a case against her uncle that they talked her into believing that she was raped when in fact she was not. And then other cases came up, and it became a whole line of women. I think like as many as 10 women who had an uncle or a teacher or someone in prison for child rape. And those girls were talked into it. And as adults, they began to figure out, especially when they got the evidence that it happened for other people, then they recognized that it happened for them too. So our memories of what happened may not actually fit reality. Another example of that would be, imagine that you've got an office business meeting, and let us say that there's 10 people in that meeting, and the meeting lasted for an hour or two. At the end of the meeting, people come out of the meeting with different opinions about what happened in the meeting. In fact, if there were 10 people in the meeting, there are 11 versions of reality. Everybody creates their own reality of that meeting, and then the next one would be, what about if it was actually recorded on camera? And so the actual events of what was recorded is different from what everybody actually experienced in that original meeting. And so it is hard for us to know what really happened in the past, that our memories are right spotty. An example of that happened to me is that I do remember, I still have the images of it, that my grandfather planted a pecan tree in a particular place in the yard. Now, we lived in Oklahoma, but I visited North Carolina on a regular basis, and we eventually moved to North Carolina by the time I was age of 10. But my mother tells me specifically, and I can do nothing else but believe my mother, that she remembers when that tree was planted, and it happened when she was living with her dad before I was born, before she was married. Now, who was right? My mother with her remembrance of something that happened when she was a teenager, or something that I remember when I was 3 or 4 years old? We remember things differently. And guess what? I take for the fact that my memory is wrong, and that the tree was not planted when I was watching. It was planted before I was born. So how many of your beliefs of what happened when you were a child are actually real? How about when we were a teenager? I remember things that happened when I was in high school, and I bet a lot of it didn't happen at all. I made that stuff up. Same thing happens in meditation. People make stuff up. They'll have a thought or an experience in meditation. They'll tell a story, and after the story gets told several times, it winds up being a past life experience. Well, no, it wasn't a memory. They just made that stuff up, and they didn't even know that they were making it up. So, Dhammadas, you're correct. Michael, you're correct. Don't rely upon the past, because a bunch of the stuff that we remember, even the original problem, probably didn't occur that way at all. We made it up. The real point is can we be really aware of what's happening right here, right now. Not that we have to remember 10 years from now what happened right now, but what we can do is that if we're paying close attention and looking at what's going on right now, the likelihood of us remembering it correctly is much higher. An example of that is someone who practices mindfulness of their hands. Then when they, let us say that they arrive home and the door is locked and they unlock the door and they rush to the toilet and they come back out after they finish with the toilet and they can't find their keys. They can't find their cell phone. Why? Because they put it down rushing into the bathroom and were not really paying attention to what they did with it. And so the correct solution to that then is to sit and think about, what did you actually do? Were you actually aware of putting those keys down? And we say, yeah, I remember I put them on the table, but they're not on the table, so they must be someplace. I might have thought I put it on the table, but in fact, they're on the floor under the table. And so I inspect there, and there's where the keys are. So, our memories are not reliable. We weren't actually watching what was going on. If I rushed to the toilet and put the keys on the table, but I missed and the keys were actually on the floor, when I come back, I'll know that they're on the floor. I'm not looking on the table for them. I'm looking on the floor where they actually are, and then I can see them. So this is a way that we have to recognize that if we pay attention to what's happening right here, right now, we're more than likely going to remember more accurately what happens. But if we're worried about what happened in the past while I'm rushing to the toilet, then I'll miss what I'm doing with the keys in the present moment. So if we're trying to figure out what the original cause was, that means then that we're not really paying attention to what's going on in reality right now. We're in a make-believe. We're in a dream. We're making stuff up. And a lot of the stuff that we make up we call memory, where in fact, it didn't happen that way. That memory and the past are unreliable, especially when we're not paying close attention. So, Emmett, what do you think about that?
I understand what you're saying. I'm not exactly sure about its scope. So, for instance, if I touch fire, I get burnt.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So then I shouldn't touch fire again, because the original cause of my burning was touching the fire.
Well, what you can say instead was, let's be more mindful around fire.
Sure.
But that doesn't mean that you can't touch it.
I mean, if you touch it again, you're going to get burnt again.
Maybe not. Maybe, in fact, when you're putting the candle out, you can moisten your fingers with your saliva, and then you can go and pinch that candle and put it right out. So touching fire is not necessarily dangerous, but this goes back to the idea of precepts and rules. You've made a rule that fire is hot and it burns and it's dangerous. And instead of then using wisdom, you've got a rule, therefore thou shalt not touch fire.
Yes. So it's like, I like to say it's like dancing. You know, there are rules and precepts for dancing or walking or whatever, but sometimes when something happens, you need to break that rule and do what's appropriate for that moment.
Exactly. This is what I'm getting at precisely. Is let's
Yes.
not deal with the rules, let's deal with reality.
Yes. So going back to the anger issue then, normally we want to avoid anger. However, if I am feeling bad if someone gets angry and I can't clean it up, then what's the wise thing to do? Is it to, what I find helpful is to accept that I'm feeling bad and that's the okay thing. if I feel angry in return, I try to minimize as much as possible, clean up as much as possible. But if that's not happening, then that's okay too, because that's also what's happening. That's what's happening right now.
Okay, I understand that concept that you're bringing in, but let's get a little bit more practical with it. All right. The Buddha, first off, was very, very big on seclusion, of getting away from it. All right. So let's say that the situation is that this woman is angry and she's trying to get you angry. She's trying to prove a point to you, and that we can avoid anger depending upon our skill level. And that if the skill level is very low, then the right thing to do is to seclude ourselves, seclude our minds from that anger. We can either, number one, stop listening to her, or even a more primitive and successful way of dealing with it is to leave the room, to get out. If she's angry at you on the cell phone, then just put the cell phone down or turn it off to get away from the anger. The second point then is to deal with her anger, but you can get away from your own anger. Now, if you can't get away from your own anger, then the best thing to do is to go back to step one of getting away from the anger physically. So we've got a third option is that we can avoid that anger by being ready for it, and we can, let us say, the language would be to be reasonable, to recognize that her anger, whatever it is unreasonable, and we can deal with it. We can be kind and happy to the woman. We can actually divert her anger. But if we get angry back at her, then that's going to feed her, and she's going to be more angry because she wants to be right. And so what we can do is we can, in fact, agree with her. We can be agreeable. And if we can do that Go ahead, Nick.
This happened to me recently, very similar situation. And I was reminded of the story you told recently. One of the Buddha's enemies sending a drunk elephant to him.
Yes,
And the way he dealt with the drunk elephant was just treating it with kindness. So you can see like someone drunk with rage, and just by treating them with kindness, can kind of avoid a lot of that rage.
Right. So that has to do then with our inner core. If we are in that rage situation and we cannot protect our inner core, then we can remove ourselves. That's the first step. That's the first thing that we would do in the sense of the lowest level of skill. The second one would be to at least keep our mouth shut, because if we speak, we'll enrage her further. And so becoming silent. And then she says something and I can stay silent, and then she'll say something else, and now I want to jump in again. So that's why it's best for the beginner is to leave the situation, because it takes more skill every time she speaks to leave it. And she speaks again in anger, and we leave it. And she speaks again in anger, and we leave it. So that requires more skill to keep leaving it over and over again, to where for the beginner, it's better just to remove ourselves from it one time, to have the courage to get out of the situation. All right. And then the third level would be not to just leave it, but to not experience her anger at all. That way we can return joy to her anger. We can give her what she wants. We can appease and calm her and be friends with her. This is actually the best solution. So we actually have 3 different levels depending upon your skill. You can escape big time, or you can escape in small ways, or you can actually turn the thing around. And that would be the one that requires the most skill. And where does this skill come from? Practice. Practice. And yet I see on YouTube from time to time, they actually have a name for them. They call them Karens, both male and female. But the Karens are the ones who, out of the blue, come up in an angry way. And most of the time, it's not handled very well. One of the best things to do, for instance, if the Karen is in a road rage, then the best thing to do is to put your car in a state that's going to make her car and her very far away. You can change lanes, slow down, stop, do whatever like that. That in fact, if she comes up to the window of your car and banging on it, probably the easy and best thing to do is to put your car in reverse and move away. Get away from her. That would be the easy thing to do. And yet, almost always people don't do that. They stay engaged. They, in fact, are more interested in recording her anger than they are in avoiding it and getting away from it. All right, so this is, I'll leave you again with the three possibilities. Is one, getting away physically. Number two, getting away from it emotionally. And number three, the one that takes the most skill, is to turn the thing around. Take her out of the anger also. Now, we can actually apply that in almost any situation. But the important point is can you, in fact, gain control over your own core? Can you empty it out enough so that you are not vulnerable? That you're the tough guy here. You're the strong one. You can handle anything. And that takes practice. And the best place to practice that is in seclusion, so that you can actually get away from your own anger. You can escape from your own anger. You can escape silently from it. Or the better thing to do is to turn it around. Bring yourself out of the anger. Talk yourself into everything's okay. There's no problems. There's no worries. And if you can bring yourself out of anger over and over again, then you're getting a skill so that you can handle anger very well. And then you can put yourself in a position to where you can deal with other people's anger by bringing them out of it. This actually comes back to, I think that I was talking to Michael about this, and that is that how do we deal with others? By smiling at them, by being easygoing with them. That in fact it's possible that if you have somebody angry at you and you smile at them, their anger will increase. But that's like their last resort, and after that they'll come down. So you can actually smile at somebody and pull them out of their anger, knowing that there's going to be a speed bump. They call it sometimes a dead cat bounce. That if you smile at somebody while they're angry, they're going to get more angry, but they'll get over it. And then you can bring them out of it. And by the way, this is also the best way of teaching the Dhamma. Not by talking to them about the Dhamma. So when someone is really angry, like a Karen is banging on your car window, that's not the right time to start talking about Paticca Samuppada and the Four Noble Truths. But what you can do is to help her calm down. Another example of what we're talking about in a way is that the Salvation Army operated, especially in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and the way that they did it was by feeding the people. That people are not ready for a sermon, they're ready to get fed. And when their bellies are full, then they can listen. So it's always kind of a 1-2 punch. We have to do a diversionary tactic first, get that settled, and then we can teach. And so Buddhism is well known to not proselytize, but we do proselytize by giving people smiles. That this is the best teacher. In fact, there. Have you ever heard of the magazine? I think it's defunct now. They don't have it anymore. It was called Reader's Digest. And in the Reader's Digest magazine, they had one recurring article that they call Laughter is the Best Medicine. Okay, smiling and laughing is not just the best medicine for ourselves on the inside, but it's also the best medicine for tough situations, like dealing with Karens or dealing with angry people, road rage and all of that, is to be light, to be humorous, to not return anger with anger, to not deal with fire, but we deal with fire by putting water on it. Joy, humor. And we can deal with all people in almost all situations that way. That's the best way to teach the Dhamma, is by smiling. And the worst way to deal with other people is by telling them what the rules are. Thou shalt not be angry. Because they don't like that. They don't like to be told what to do. That's funny about humans. We don't like to be told what to do, and yet that's how we live our lives, is by according to a set of rules of doing what we were told to do when we were kids. And so we continue to do what we're told to do and not like it. Funny like that. So, Michael, do you have anything to say?
It's worthwhile to be friendly.
Yes, to be friendly with oneself on the inside and to be friendly with other people on the outside. That's the rule that we need to follow. Not a whole bunch of precepts, a Sharia law, 10 Commandments, English common law, the state laws of South Carolina, or any of that kind of stuff is not the way to deal with life. The right way to deal with life is by having only one rule, and that is dukkha nirodha, to take the fire out of it, out of your own core, out of your own heart, and then you can deal with other people correctly, with sweetness, with joy, with humor. So, Nick, do you have any comments?
That the dukkha nirodha is really all the steering. That's the direction you need to steer the truck as it's going down.
Exactly, to avoid trouble.
Yeah.
That's the whole point, is to avoid all the pitfalls, to avoid the ruts, to avoid the dukkha, to avoid the dissatisfaction, so that we come back able to live a life full of joy and happiness, because we're watching where we're going.
And not paying attention to how we got there.
And not paying attention to how we got there. But look at where we're going right now, the immediate future. So, Dhammadas, do you have any questions or anything to say?
Not really. Just thank you so much for everything.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I would like to point out is in the conversation that I had with Steve yesterday, he made the point that, well, what about people who get started in a practice and then don't continue the practice. Like a piano student, if the kid doesn't like playing the piano, he won't practice, and then he'll quit taking lessons, and his mom will be angry, but he won't become a musician. But if the kid likes what he's doing, he's more likely to continue to do it. But the point is that with the Dhamma, if we are practicing and not getting good benefit out of it, one of two things will happen. One is that people will stop practicing meditation, and the other one is that they'll go into it with strong determination, with fortitude, with a set of rules about you should do this, and they wind up being hardcore Dhamma dudes. And I mean hardcore. In the sense that hardcore is actually protecting an even deeper inner core of a victimhood. But it let us have the idea then that people are practicing correctly. If we practice correctly and get good benefit out of it, we'll enjoy that benefit and then say, wow, my job is done here. And then we can relax and then not watch where we're going and wind up having another wreck. And so what I pointed out to Steve is that it's always best then to have noble friends, Dhamma friends, to continue to talk with each other, to have that group of people who are going to help guide you and to help put you back onto the Dhamma path and to keep it practicing, keeping it active. Just like in AA, they want to keep people who are trying to stop drinking alcohol to stop associating with their old barflies and their old lounge lizard friends. That you stay away from the bar. Well, that's really hard to do when you're, let us say, living a Western life. That you have to keep dealing with all the lounge lizards of life. But the better thing to do is to always have a refuge, to always have the Sangha, to always have good Dhamma friends that you keep coming back to over and over again. And so I want to congratulate you all for coming on and being part of the conversation here so that we can continue to talk about the Dhamma over and over again. We need to have those friends. We need to have those conversations. We keep needing to be reminded that the Dhamma is what we should be paying attention to. And when we start paying attention to it more and more and more and more, then that means that we're actually entering the stream of Dhamma, that we're actually beginning to live our life as if there is nothing else to do but Dhamma. And this is the way that we want to live. And the better way of doing that is by having a lot of friends, not being in seclusion all the time, and certainly not out in the world dealing with worldly people who are not. For instance, the Karens are not interested in being friends. They're interested in being right. They're interested in protecting themselves. They're interested in showing how angry they are. And so these are the kind of people that you want to avoid and start associating with noble friends, Dhamma friends, the ones who are already having Dhamma on the mind most of the time, because that's all they'll talk to you about is Dhamma. And so this is the kind of folks that you want to associate with on a regular basis. And so I highly encourage everybody to go on the various things that we have. Like there's a Discord group called Dhamma Friends. We have the Skype that we have several groups. And we also have the website of Open Sangha Foundation that I would highly recommend that you begin to spend more time on our website, messaging friends, sending them emails, talking to them on the side, that in fact we might in fact be able to get it going so that we can have chats and conversations and maybe even live videos on the website. Depends upon how time goes by. But this is the last point that I would make, is associate with good friends. This is the Sangha. This is the triple gem. This is the real refuge. The real refuge is by hanging out with Dhamma friends. We have the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, and Western Buddhism is all about Dhamma, 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 without really cleaning out their own mind and becoming that that Buddha, that awakened, that watchful. But the real problem with Western Buddhism is that there's no Sangha, there's no core of community. And this is what we need to build. And so I highly advise to keep that in mind, to make sure that you keep coming back to having noble friends, spend time with them, talk to them, get Dhamma conversations going. So does anybody have any last words? How about you, Nick?
Very appreciative to be part of this Sangha. It's a big refuge in my life.
Yes. How about you, Amen? What do you think?
I'm good.
Excellent. How about you, Michael?
Happy to be here with the Sangha, and I very much enjoyed this wonderful call. Thank you, everyone.
How about you, Dhammadas? Excellent. All right, guys. Well, thank you. We'll see you later. Keep coming back to the Dhamma. Keep coming back to the Dhamma, friends, and we'll see you. Okay. Bye-bye.